starts. Okay, so the idea today is to refresh the features from GitHub that allow us to work with Git and GitHub. I know that everyone here already uses Git and GitHub. So again, it is just a bit of a refresher, mostly in the interest of being on the same page for the upcoming workshop that is in about, I think, 2 weeks or 10 days from now. As usual, I'm collecting the steps and thoughts that we're going to be presenting today in a Google Doc that has the date of today and then DSI. So you're welcome to go to that now or after. But mostly, given that we see a few people here, I'm going to focus mostly on the value of this meetup as it will be in the record. So basically, I'm going to be moving with the assumption that we all know this material, just refreshing it and leaving a video record for the next people to come. So the objectives for today is basically to practice pretty much as many features as we can that we can access from RStudio to work with Git and GitHub. The very first thing we're going to do is also to show how to set up your RStudio project to submit pull requests during the workshop, because the idea is that some of the things that we will be doing will be great if we can push them as pull requests to the workshop repository. So the idea is that you not only will be learning concepts, but also will be practicing many times this workflow, how you work with GitHub in collaboration with others. So this is one of the objectives of today: set things up so that you're ready to go for the workshop. Also, we are going to be using Git and GitHub from RStudio. So we are going to be doing things like ignoring files, removing files, reverting files, adding new files that didn't exist in that Git repository, modifying files that did exist, creating commits, amending commits, and finally submitting a pull request. So basically, all the most common tasks that you need in your everyday life and to collaborate with others. And it's totally okay, and I do expect that people develop different preferences for different tools. So some people may be using a specific Git client, others will be using the terminal. But today, I will focus just on everything we can do from RStudio as a way to demonstrate, the kind of the minimum toolkit that you need to, work productively. And then anything else, you can see it as an extension. So in terms of setup, we have discussed a setup that is very well documented in the book Happy Git with R. So here in this talk, I put a link to the most common remote setups. And the one that I have been stressing is referred to in that book as the fork of theirs setup, but there is many more. The reason why I advocate for that is mostly because it is the most flexible, and you can contribute using that setup either to the 2 Degrees Investing organization or to remote repositories that are managed by completely external people. So if you know that setup, then you are able to do everything. But that doesn't mean that it may be the only setup. And as Alex suggested recently, maybe for some people, the most useful setup might be a simpler one. In any case, they are all documented at that link, so I encourage you to go there. But my only kind of warning is that when you do not use forks, you have to be very careful about how you manage on GitHub the permission levels of the different people working in that project. And you have to take care of protecting specific branches like the master branch so that people cannot push by accident changes that are not meant to be there. So wrapping up, the workflow I recommend is kind of the safest in that it's very hard to make harm to the project accidentally, as opposed to other workflows that if you don't pay attention or if you don't set some protections in place, you may be committing some accidents that then is kind of hard to undo. But jumping into the activity itself, as you just to confirm, can anyone give me a thumbs up if you're seeing correctly my screen? You should be seeing this. You can? Cool. You can't? Oh, okay. So I forgot to share. Present now your entire screen. Sorry for that. Great that I checked. Good. So this is what I was referring to. Here is the link as usual. Here are the objectives that I listed. Here is the link that I mentioned to the setups and the image that captures the kind of setup that I have been advocating for, but certainly it's not the only one, and you are welcome to use other setups. Is this one where we fork a repository from an organization, and then we create connections to a clone that go both ways, so you can push and pull. And also we create this connection from the main repository so we can pull changes that have been pushed to upstream. How we implement that? Well, we use this package with a function create from GitHub. We can do all of that automatically if we use the setup that I covered last week. So last meetup explains how to set up your project so that this function just works, and every setup in general that I'm going to be talking about today works. If you haven't done that, I encourage you to revisit a video that I recorded after the meetup last week. It's 16 minutes and leaves your environment in good shape. The video is about RStudio Cloud, but you can reproduce the same setup on your desktop, so you should be good to go. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use RStudio Cloud, just the same project that I set up last week. So the very first step then is set up a project. Here I want to create a clone in this RStudio Cloud project, a clone of the fork of this repository called 2 Degrees Investing TidyDS. So this repository, the TidyDS repository, is the repository that we will be working during the workshop. So by running this function now, I create a permanent connection with that repository, meaning that I would be able to, for example, submit pull requests to it as part of the exercises during the workshop. So as you can see, that function did a lot of things for me and now left me inside that project. So once again, can you confirm that you do see here on the left the Google Doc and here on the right RStudio? Okay, cool. I'm intentionally leaving this screen split in half. I acknowledge that the writing might be a little small, but I do it that way so that you now, or whenever you see this recording later, you can use the left-hand side of this screen to overlay your own RStudio and kind of follow along. So I don't have to now make pauses. I will just keep going, assuming that you can follow along. And if you're interested in following up, you can use this left side of the screen. So the very first thing that we do is to create a new branch. That's always the case. Remember, in the GitHub workflow, branches are at the core of that workflow. So PR init initializes a branch. So I'm going to call that branch 00 my name. Or actually just my name should be fine. And that is one way of creating a branch from the console with use this. And the reason why I do it this way is because it creates a bunch of connections that I'm interested in having. But you could also use the Git pane here. You will, this is one of the features that I want to kind of show off of, Git features inside RStudio. So by clicking this icon here, you can also create a new branch. It is just that, like this little thing, like if you want to synchronize the branch with some remote and which branch you choose, those are things that use this will do for me automatically. So I prefer to just leave it to use this. So I'm going to just run this line of code. And as you see, it is not that it just creates a branch. It does a bunch of other things too. And more importantly, creates a connection between my branch and the upstream branch, and make sure that my now branch has everything that has been pushed last minute to the upstream. And I also get a reminder of what to do when I'm ready to submit my pull request, which is to just run the function PR push. So we are already done with this step. The next part of this little tutorial is to actually start doing a bunch of things to this repository to demonstrate as many features as possible that are available within RStudio. So the very first thing I want to show you is kind of, explain what we have here. So this project that you see here, this is the files pane. As you can see, it has an RStudio project, has a README file as usual, and then it has this folder called 00 setup. So this is the folder of kind of today's exercise. So I'm going to click in it to get in it. And as we can see, inside this folder, there is these two files. One is an RMD file and the other one is an HTML file. The very first thing I will do is I'm going to open that RMD file by just clicking on the file. I get it here on the files on the source pane, and I'm going to make a change to this file just to show you, what the Git pane shows when you change a file and save it. Just to begin with, so the first change I do, I remove the HTML part and I do GitHub document. So I have changed the file. I'm going to save it, and when I press save 1, 2, 3, you will see that here I have now that file appeared on the Git pane. So that's another feature that RStudio provides. It gives you a view of the staging area, what it's called. Imagine a stage on a theater. So what's happening on that stage? So Git has that stage for you, and it's showing you on the stage now this new file that has been this file that has been recently modified. And the word modified here is key, because as you can see, the name of the file is prefixed with an M, which means modify. So it refers to a file that existed already in the Git repository. Git knew about this file, and now we are modifying this file that Git already knew about. Okay, second feature that I want to show off. When you have modified a file, no matter how many lines you have changed, you can always revert those changes by clicking on the file itself with the opposite click, right or left, depending how you set your mouse. And you can navigate to the revert icon. And when you click there, it's going to ask you to confirm, because you're going to lose those changes. So if you say yes, you clear, in this case, that file disappears from the staging area. As you can see, the change that we did has disappeared. Right? So that's another feature of RStudio or of Git that is available from RStudio. You can revert changes on the staging area. But I do want to do that change, so I'm going to do it again. So actually, I do really like the GitHub document file format. I prefer it over the HTML format. And the reason is because neither the RMD nor the HTML files render in a useful way on GitHub. So let me show you that. And at the same time, I'm going to demonstrate another feature of Git that is available from RStudio. So, but before doing that, actually, no, I can do it now. Actually, I'm going to change in the document the order of the things that I expected to show, so it makes sense. So I want to show you that when we go to GitHub, this file with extension RMD and HTML, none of them is very useful, really. So one feature that you have on RStudio to navigate to GitHub very quickly is this little icon here that is very hard to notice and it's very easy to miss. So when you click on that drop down, you have an icon that says view the current file, basically the file that is opened on your source pane. You can click there, and that will take you to the browser, specifically to that file on GitHub. So as you can see, I am now standing on the main repository, not on my fork. It is showing me that file, and as you can see, what I see here is just the source code of the file, but it is not showing me any output of the file. And the same thing happens if I navigated back to the parent of this file and now into the HTML version of this file. Again, what you could be seeing is the source code of the HTML file with all these tags that are horrible to read. And again, although the output is there, I can't read it. I mean, it's horrible. So let's forget about those files. Let's instead work with GitHub document. So that's why I changed this to GitHub document. And let me show you what it will look like. So when we click the knit button, that's not a feature of Git, it's just a feature of R Markdown. So we click there. I'm going to produce that render version that combines the source code, is run, and then the output is presented in this file. I mean, this might not be surprising to you because you are already familiar with this. So here we have like an HTML preview of it, but it is this also generates a file with extension MD, and MD is a file that GitHub knows about and can interpret in a beautiful way. So not now, because that file doesn't still exist on GitHub, but by the end of this little demo, that I will have pushed that file to GitHub, and then I should be able to see it and show you how on GitHub I can not only see the source code but also the rendered version. So that's a lot more useful, because when you are trying to communicate your science with others, the others should be able to see what you did without them needing to run any code. You know, if the file combines the input and the output, then they don't have to run it. If they choose to run it, it's a different thing, but they shouldn't need to run it to understand what your code is doing. So the next step is to reflect on what we see on the staging area on the Git pane. Remember that when we changed a file that Git already knew about, it prefixed it with the M icon, right? Because it was a modification to a file. But now also notice that the file with the name untitled.html has a D, and it's gone from what's called the working tree. It's gone from our folder. Why? Well, because the GitHub document by default looks for a file matching the same name, and if there is an HTML file, it will remove it. So we have this new icon now that means deletion. So the D comes from delete. So this file has also changed. The HTML file has changed, and it is not any change, it is a deletion. So that's why it is prefixed with the D. And then there is this other new icon, that is new for this tutorial, that is a question mark. What does it mean? Okay, the question mark means that Git does not know about that file yet. So the file is now in our project, but it's in our what's called the working tree, and it's not on that stage. Git is asking us with this question mark, what do we want to do about that file? Do we want to include it, or do we want to remove it? What do we want to do? It won't track it unless we tell it to do so. So notice that when I do click the icon to add that file to the staging area, I'm asking Git to put it in that theater staging area, then the icon changes from the question mark to A. A means addition. So by clicking that box, we are explicitly telling Git to start tracking that file. So there is another icon there, the A. But even before I do that, I want to show you another feature of Git that is available through RStudio, which is the ability to ignore files. Because the HTML output is not very useful to the point that the GitHub document by default removes it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore that file so that I will never kind of add any change to it again accidentally. So how do I do that? Okay, there is a bunch of ways of doing this, but RStudio provides a shortcut. So if you right click or left click, depending on your mouse settings, you will see that there is an option to ignore. So you can click there on ignore, and you will be presented with this little GUI, with this little interface that shows you that there is this file that's going to be created under this directory, in the same directory where we are standing now. The file is going to be called .gitignore, and it is going to contain this line, basically the name of the file that we want to ignore. So if I click here in save, you can see that now Git has noticed that there is this new file under the 00 setup folder called .gitignore that has been added to my working tree, but again, it's still not in the staging area, so I have to tell it what to do. Another feature of Git available from RStudio is the ability to quickly inspect a file from the staging area. So if I wanted to know more about that file, I can go here to open file, and that will now appear on my source code pane, right? So as expected, because that was the preview that we got before, the file is called .gitignore. It is stored under the 00 setup folder, and all the contents that it has is the name of the file that I want to ignore. If I wanted to ignore more files in that directory, I could continue writing their names here, manually if you want, but I recommend you to find automated ways to add files to Git Ignore so that you don't make typos, for example. So let's close that. The next step is the following. So far I have achieved changing the file untitled RMD to output a GitHub document, which is what I want. But the name itself, untitled, is not very meaningful. So it would be great if you want to practice with this for you to change that file to something that has your name and then submit a pull request. So what I would be asking you to do is click here, for example, that's one way to change the name of the file, and click on rename. And then here you say something like, in my case, right? So with that change, then these other two kind of products of having needed the file before I changed its name, these two products become kind of obsolete because they have the name untitled, which is the name that the file had before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up the working tree. So before I do that, I want to pause and reflect on the staging area. So again, I recommend you to become friends with the staging area because it can give you very useful information about what's happening in your project. For example, I'm ready to delete these two files. So let's have a look at how these files show on the staging area, and let's reflect on the icon that they have and what information that tells me about what's going to happen with those files. So let's start with untitled.md, which is this file here. As you can see, this file was never tracked by Git. It only appeared after I changed the file untitled to become a GitHub document, and only when I render it by clicking the init button. So that file has never been added to the staging area and therefore has a question mark icon. Because Git never knew about that file, if I remove it now there, what would you expect it to have? Well, it will disappear from the staging area because Git never knew of it, and now I'm removing it. So as far as Git can tell, it never really existed in what it is the Git repository. So a Git repository is something inside your project, inside your folder, that is keeping track of specific files that you want to track. So if this file has never been added there, when I remove it, for example, by clicking here on delete, that file will not have a D prefix. It would be just gone. It could only have a D if I have ever added it and committed it to Git. But if you never committed it, it will be just gone, okay? And the same thing with untitled files, which is a folder that the init process produced that contains some figures inside. It's not important now, so all I want to do is to remove it. And again, because it has never been tracked by Git, when I click delete, I expect this line to just disappear. Let's see if that happens. Let's remove it, and it's gone. Okay. So again, the staging area gives you information about the status of your files and how it relates to the last known commit. Okay, that is what all that Git is doing. But now we do have some stuff that I care about. I have this file that now has my name, and I would like to produce the output for this file. So I'm going to click init to produce the MD version of this file, now that it has the name that I wanted it to have. This is the preview. I'm going to close it. So here now you can see that the knitting process has now produced that MD file. So that MD file, when I click on it, opens up as an MD file here in the kind of source code mode. But as soon as I click this preview button, it will transform into the thing that we have just seen. It will transform into the rendered beautiful version that we would like to push to GitHub so that it's available there. By the way, when you knit for the first time on RStudio Cloud, it may ask you to install a package called Tiny Text. If that's what you get, go ahead and say yes, and eventually you will be able to produce the output. So my preview also produced this file called maurolepore.html, and that's not a file that I want to save. Again, the HTML files, I don't want them. And one way I could kind of ignore all HTMLs could be to change the Git Ignore file, this one here, I could open that file, and instead of saying, okay, forget about untitled HTML, I could say something, forget about anything HTML. And I hope that will work. Let's see. I save that file, and actually I still have it there. So let me use a trick from. Well, I expect that to work. Maybe I've kind of forgot how that. Or maybe I need to refresh. Let's see. There is this refresh thingy here. So the staging area is not updated immediately. Sometimes you have to kind of refresh it. And here you go. Now the file maurolepore.html is gone. So good to know, right? That this file is here, but it doesn't appear on the staging area, right? And the reason why it was appearing before is because I hadn't refreshed. So notice that I have changed the Git Ignore to take a pattern now, not just the name of a file, but a pattern that will match any HTML. So we have Ignore files, we have view files, we have rename files. Okay, so now the next thing we need to do is to create the commits and push. So let's do that, and we have probably just about enough time for that. So what I'm going to be doing now is to create I'm going to create two commits, but the first commit I'm going to create it in two steps to show off one additional feature of Git from RStudio, which is the ability to amend commits. So I'm going to start by adding the Git Ignore file. So I click here on the stage, on the box here that creates the stages that file, and then on commit. That will open this interface, and I'm going to add a message related to that commit, something like ignore HTML, and I click commit. Okay, I have just created one commit, but now suddenly I realize that there are other changes related to that previous commit that I would like to be included in the same commit. But what do I do? Because I already did the commit. Okay, let's fix that. So if I find that, for example, this file untitled.html, that's a file that I removed because it's an HTML, and it's a similar problem. I did that to solve a problem that is similar to the one by which I created the previous commit. It relates to the idea of removing and getting rid of HTML. So probably a good thing would be to add that to the staging area, to create commit. And instead of creating a new commit, I can amend the previous commit by clicking here on amend previous commit. As you can see, when I click that box, I get the message that I typed last time, right? So what I'm going to do is to amend that message by saying ignore and remove HTML. So now the previous commit is completely amended and became one commit. So I did one commit, but in two steps, right? By first creating a commit and then amending the previous one. And as we are here, let's continue to work on the staging area. So there is other files that also relate. So all these other files relate to the problem of renaming the untitled file to use my name. So if I click on this file that is the old name that the file had, and now the new name that the file has, notice that first Git thinks there are two different changes, but we know that instead it was a rename. So when I click the two of them, remember this was, so untitled was the older name, and then I rename it to Mauro Lepore. So when I stage the two, then Git realizes, okay, it was a rename action. So now we are presented with a new icon that so far we haven't seen, which is the R. The R stands for rename. So that has renamed a file, right? And now Git knows about that. So here I can create a new commit that says rename file to Mauro Lepore and create a commit. And probably the last commit is something related to render the GitHub document. And with that, I have created three commits. Each of them is independent from the others. They are each of them meaningful on themselves. And I can kind of inspect now the history, and I can see my three commits, 1, 2, 3. These are the three commits that I did since I started this pull request. So I'm now ready to finish this thing. But remember, there is a hint here. I just need to run the function PR push. and that will send me to the web browser, to the interface where I can actually create the pull request on the upstream repository. So it takes me to the main repo. It shows me this interface here where my branch 00 Maurolepore from the repository on my fork. I have some commits there that I want to propose to be merged into the master branch of the main repository. So that all looks good. I create pull request, and that is what we have accomplished. So with that, if you are able to walk through this video and the previous one where I show you how to set things up so that our use this just works, you will be ready for the workshop, and you will be ready for working with minimal friction in every day. That's the end, and I have gone 3 minutes beyond the mark. So do we have any questions before we say goodbye? Good. Just quick question from me. Did anyone learn at least one new thing that RStudio has that you thought, oh, actually, I didn't know that you could do that on RStudio? Cool. Excellent. There you go. Yeah. 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 As any other tool, the tool itself is not exciting. It's interesting, I think, because it's a tool that we have there. We have to use because we have to. A lot of people use RStudio, so sometimes it makes sense to use other tools, and sometimes it's something that you can do just from RStudio. So my goal was to give you the minimal toolkit that you need to work effectively, and I do encourage you to work with whatever tool that you prefer. With that, I thank you very much. I also apologize to the next to Tyler and Alex for bumping into their meeting. Bye bye. Ciao, ciao.